and welcome to a very special episode of Stand Up. And by special, I mean I'm not on it. Yeah, that's right. I've got a guest host, and it's the great S.E. Cupp. I'm trying to take the week off, and that means having someone sit in for me because I do want to post the show. Something for you to listen to every day, something to listen and learn together with you every day. And that's why I decided to have S.E. Cupp. I asked S.E. Cupp to sit in for me, and I said, anybody you want to interview? And she said, you know who I'd love to talk to is Dr. Stephen Hassan. So S.E. introduces a little bit herself and Dr. Stephen Hassan and says all kinds of really nice things about me. Thank you so much for sitting in, S.E. You are the absolute greatest. Just a class act, a smart, funny, brilliant, wise human being, and I'm very glad to call you a friend as well. It's always great to hear from Stephen Hassan. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. If you haven't signed up for a subscription, please do now. StandUpWithPete.com is the website to go and sign up, or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominic. And with all of that said, it's time to hand it over to S.E. Cupp. Follow her right now at S.E. Cupp on Twitter and Instagram. She says the rest. You can take it from here, S.E.
Hey, I'm S.E. Cupp. Welcome to Stand Up with Pete Dominic. I'm not Pete Dominic. I'm S.E. Cupp. And you might know me. I don't know. You might know me from CNN, or I have a nationally syndicated column if people still read. I hope you do. I've written some books. Real Time with Bill Maher, I do a lot. I'm a big Bravo fan. Maybe you know me from over there. Or maybe you know me because I'm like the lady that likes to talk about mental health a lot recently. However, you are familiar with me if you are, and maybe you're not. I am super, grateful, glad to be here, filling in for Pete while he's on a much-needed vacation. I just got back from mine. So I'm excited for, I think, the rest and relaxation he's going to have this week. But listen, because he's not here, I want to take this rare opportunity to say something about him, because he's not here and he is not listening like in real time, which is a gift. I want you to know, I'm sure you love Pete, or you wouldn't tune in all the time. You love him. And I love him too. But I just want you to know, coming up in this business, now 20 years for me, you don't meet a lot of great people. You meet some good people. You meet some useful people. You meet some people who could be good for a time, maybe then turn on you. There are people who want to use you. There are people who want to exploit you. There are people who want to push you down so that they can get ahead. That happens all the time. It's just, I love my business, but it's also full of some not great people. And, if I had to break it down this way, women are the worst because we're so competitive with each other. And I've just met a lot of women who thought of me as competition or something to be taken down. But from the men, you get a different kind of treatment, sometimes a very unwanted kind of attention. We all know what I'm talking about. But you can also get a condescension from men, an attempt to make women, to belittle women and make us look less than at a panel or at the table. Meet a lot of those. So it's rare that you meet a colleague, and Pete is a colleague, who values you, takes you seriously, lifts you up, respects you, reads your work, honors your work. I can't tell you how many times I've done a radio or a television show where the host will openly admit, I didn't read the last thing you did. Why don't you tell us about it? Or, I love this last thing you read, but I only skimmed it. and Pete reads everything, that he wants to talk about and honors me as a creator and someone who takes a lot of time putting together what I do and values that. It's real rare. It does not go unnoticed. And I hope that if you have someone like that in your life, in your circle, and if you're in my industry, I hope you at least meet one of those, because I've met very few. And so with him gone, I just wanted to take that opportunity to embarrass him a bit. Pete's a great, great person. And I don't think I don't want to picture my world of media and work without him in it. So I'm glad to be here filling in for just a short period of time. Okay. When Pete asked me to do this fill in this hour, I said, okay, but can I get a guest? He said, sure. I said, there's only one person I'm thinking of. I want Steve Hassan to come in, and I want to talk about cults the entire time. Now, I'll tell you why, because it's I think an important topic right now, and especially through the lens of politics. And I think we're getting that story super wrong. So I want to look at it through a different lens. And also just, whether it's NXIVM and the Vow, QAnon, there's a lot going on in this world of cults. And I think there's some crossover and overlap that make it a really important topic to mine. And, well, there is no one better to do that with than Steve Hassan. I don't know if you've probably seen him on TV. I know Pete's interviewed him here, and he's really been a lot of places. But Steve's an expert on cults, on undue influence, brainwashing, unethical hypnosis. He's author of the best-selling book, Combating Cult Mind Control. He's a licensed mental health professional. He's a cult expert. He's gotten people out of cults. He's a consultant. He's really done it all. It would take a long time to go through his resume. But he's founding director of the Freedom of Mind Resource Center. So he really works in this space of mind control and the techniques that cults use to corrupt and coerce and recruit victims. So he really is, he is the expert on this. And I'm just gonna work him for the next however many minutes. Steve, thanks so much for coming on. I'm so excited to do this. I hope you're ready, because I just have a ton of questions.
I'm very excited to meet you. I have been following your work and seen you many, many times on TV.
On Bravo.
And on everything. And but I first want to just say I second all your sentiments about Pete. He's really intelligent, asks really good questions, has always, honored and respected my work and valued it and promoted it, even when mainstream media censored me, and I'm still largely censored from my point of view. So I just want to second that. And then a personal comment to you. I am the youngest of three. I have two older sisters. I was born in 1954, so I was educated as a feminist from early on. So I had girlfriends who were like, don't open the door for me. If I'm there first, I'm going to open the door. And I'm like, okay, whatever you want. Anyway, I just want you to know that there's some history.
You can open the door for me.
Yes.
I won't mind.
I like to open doors for guys, too. I just want to be courteous is how I think about it, honestly. Anyway, I'm all yours. Ask away.
We've got all the courtesies out of the way. And enough about Pete, all right? I don't want to give him a bigger head. But, yes, we love him. Okay, so there's a lot I want to get to. I want to get to QAnon. I want to get to Ginny Thomas. I want to talk about the Vow. I want to talk about Scientology. I don't know if you can see the sweatshirt I'm wearing.
I can see don't.
Years. It says don't be culty.
Culty, wow. Excellent.
And Leah Remini, a very outspoken critic of Scientology, sells these sweatshirts. And so I bought one to support her. But I want to start with the obvious, which to me is that Trumpism seems to have become more operative as a kind of cult than a political movement in the way I've been familiar with political movements my whole life. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think, it became increasingly clear to me as we moved through the era of Trump and then the insurrection and then all the conspiracy theories, that if we're trying to solve Trumpism like it's a political movement, like a political ideology, we're going to get that wrong. But if we look at it more like a cult, and I don't mean that every Trump supporter is in a cult or brainwashed. I mean, if you go to a QAnon rally or if you talk to someone who thinks JFK Jr. is going to run on the ticket and wasn't recovered as a body in the middle of the ocean from a plane crash when I was in college, you're not really motivated or animated by politics. You're motivated and animated by other things. So talk to me about the cult of Trump from your perspective. What isn't cult-like about it and what is?
Great question. So for your listeners, I want to start by just saying I got interested in this because I was in the Moonies cult in the mid-'70s. I was a creative writing major, so it was not my ambition to become a cult expert, but it was really after my deprogramming that I realized I'd been lied to, and I had been subjected to a version of Chinese communist brainwashing, but more sophisticated. And it was after a near-fatal van crash and that experience with ex-members that I wanted to understand what happened to me. So it was really a matter of survival. I had no idea I'd be spending my life work 46 years later talking about this, much less talking about the cult of Trump. So I just want to set that table for your listeners.
Before you go on, I think that's really interesting. Looking back, do you see how you were vulnerable to it then?
100%.
And to someone who says today, like, I could never be coerced to get into a cult. What do you say?
I'd say that's called the myth of invulnerability. To think only others could happen to them because they're stupid, because they're weak, because they don't have a religious upbringing, they didn't have a good family. All these excuses of blaming the victim. I actually came from a very intact middle-class family, good values, hardworking, extra honor student, skipped 8th grade. I grew up, by the way, 1.3 miles from Donald Trump on the inexpensive side of Union Turnpike. He was in Jamaica Estates. I was in a small attached 3-bedroom house where I could hear the next-door neighbors flushing the toilet, but nevertheless, my vulnerability, very simply, it's a little embarrassing, but my vulnerability was my girlfriend dumped me very abruptly, and I was down, and 3 women flirted with me, pretending to be students of Queens College, and I asked them, are you part of a religious group? Oh, no, not at all. We're just a group of students who are trying to make the world a better place. Little did I know, within a few weeks, I'd be bowing to an altar with Moon's picture on it, reciting a pledge to fight for the fatherland, which was Korea, and later being groomed as a leader, thinking democracy was satanic and we had to infiltrate the government to get rid of Satan. So it was such a radical personality change that my family freaked out. They all said I was in a cult. They all said I was brainwashed, but I had been so programmed to expect persecution that the more they attacked me, trying to show me facts, the more I dug in my cult identity.
Well, that's a good place to turn to Trump, because where I work at CNN and others have done extensive research into the cult of QAnon and these kind of Trumpy circles that show just that. The more you try to show facts, the more they dig in, and they can feel like victims and everyone else is against them. And so, what our research has turned up is that that's not actually, like, going home for Thanksgiving and telling your conspiracy theorist dad, look at all the facts, is actually not gonna.
It's actually counterproductive. It makes the person feel less understood, less respected, and a name calling. And unfortunately, a lot of people have cut off contact with their loved ones or friends who got radicalized. But to come back to your question, Essie, if I may, I think of cults on a continuum, and I call my podcast the Influence Continuum, from ethical influence to unethical influence. So for me, there are ethical, benign, even productive cults where people are passionate and fervent, but there's informed consent. You can question and get answers. Right. You can talk to whoever you want to talk to, read whatever you want to read, watch whatever you want.
You're not cut off from your family.
And you can leave without threats or harassment.
Right.
Right? So when I say the cult of Trump is an authoritarian cult that is comprised largely of authoritarian cults, even before he was elected president, his base, which I think the media has had it wrong to call them Christian evangelicals, because my colleagues who are Christian evangelicals are like, well, I follow Jesus. I don't follow a person, a man or a woman who says they're an apostle or a prophet who gets direct revelations from God and speaks in tongues and can't.
That you just described Jesus at one point too, but I mean, every religion starts as a cult, right?
Right. The Jews were a cult. They had a cult of the temple where they sacrificed animals. I mean, but the issue is really we're in the 21st century, and we now have awareness of human rights. You know, like women should have equal rights, and gay people should have equal rights, and other religions should have equal rights. Our country, America, was not founded as a Christian nation. It was deliberately founded with a separation of church and state, so there wouldn't be a state religion. But the forces that have been active for decades, really since World War II, in a very organized way, have been wanting to, in a sense, develop a counter to communist brainwashing by brainwashing people for Jesus, or their words, Jesus. Not what Jesus taught, like, you know, my kingdom is not of this world, and it's hard for a wealthy person to go to the kingdom of heaven. That's the historical, biblical Jesus. This is a made-up version using Christianity as a veneer, saying, give us all your money, and you'll be blessed 10 times. I'll have my 3 jets and my mansions and limos, and you'll be paying off your credit card that you've donated. Like, that's not Christianity in a healthy way.
Well, and let me just also weigh in as, you know, a center-right person who came up through conservative politics. And, you know, I've written about evangelicals and Christian America and the religious right. It's not the version of Christianity I think most people are familiar with. It's also not the version of conservatism that I grew up with. This cultiness, autocratic, anti-democratic, a really big government, not small government. Who cares about the debt and the deficit? That doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
It's mean. The cruelty is the point. Punishing people. It's like vengeance politics. Rather than find converts, you're after heretics. It's really an ugly perversion of the kind of uplifting, self-reliant conservatism of Reagan and others that I came up with. So it's been disorienting on 2 fronts. To watch evangelicals that I know become Trumpy cultists. And to your point, many have not. But to watch some that I know become Trumpy cultists and start worshiping Trump instead of Jesus has been disorienting. And then to watch conservatives abandon, really jettison everything that made them conservative so that they could support Trump has been equally as disorienting. Right. But I also know people who have just completely abandoned their lives, like their past lives, their friendships, their colleagues, their work, to just burrow in to Trumpiness. Whether that's QAnon or just, you know, doing everything they can to support Trump and pick up on the conspiracy theories. How does that happen to people who, as you say, aren't necessarily broken? They're not idiots. They're not looking to fill, you know, holes that were left by broken families or whatever. How does it happen to people you and I knew, people you and I probably thought were incapable of falling into these conspiracy holes?
Right. So there's a lot to unpack. I'm going to start with how I started researching the Cult of Trump book for Simon & Schuster, which was knowing all of the cults I've studied over 4 decades. The leaders displayed characteristics of malignant narcissism. So that's what I knew Trump was. He already had a cult of personality, and his businesses were run as a cult, an authoritarian cult. So that's where I started. And it was only later, as I dug into my research, that I realized Putin had influence over him, and Putin was very upset that the Soviet Union collapsed. And so he's been on payback mode to destroy America from within and without. The Family, Jeffrey Charlotte wrote 2 books and did a Netflix series on that cult that recruited Republicans and Democrats, I might add.
Right.
Opus Dei, which is a very right-wing part of the Catholic Church that I've actually helped counsel people out of it and who had problems because they were raised in it. Then the New Apostolic Reformation, which has 30 to 40 million Americans in it and an estimated 300 to 400 million worldwide. This is the new branch of Pentecostal Christianity where these people are self-appointed prophets. I'm getting a revelation, and they're using the standard, what I refer to as the bite model of authoritarian control methods, which is behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, all designed to break you down, confuse you, disorient you, overload you, then start programming in a new identity that's in the image of the group or the leader, and then refreezing ultimately the cult identity that then suppresses your real self. And this is a critical point that everyone needs to understand, that the real person is still there. If you had have a relative who got radicalized into MAGA, the person you knew is still there in their neurons, but right now it's like they've been hacked, and there's a pseudo identity that's dependent and obedient on these external authority figures that's keeping it suppressed. And it was that realization that helped me get out of the Moonies when I was like, wait a minute, Moon's a liar. If he's a liar, that means I can't trust him. If he's a liar and I can't trust him, then he can't be a representative of God. What have I been doing for 2.5 years?
Right, but that's a very rational realization. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine a person. But that was after 5
days of deprogramming, Essie.
Well, right. But it's hard for me to imagine, looking at Trump and everything we know about him and not being able to see very clearly he's a liar. Like, believe your own eyes. He lies professionally. He's a liar. He's using you. He's exploiting you. He just wants your loyalty. He also wants your money. I mean, let's not forget the grift part of this. How does that get completely sort of turned off so that a person can say, take more of my money, take more of my loyalty? I know that he's lying, but I'm going to still follow him and tell everyone to believe in him. And I'm also in the process going to hate everyone that doesn't agree with me.
Yeah, so part of my thesis in the cult of Trump is that Trump is better to be thought of as a symptom of bad things that have been accruing over decades versus he's a mastermind and a genius who's chosen by God. No.
Right.
And so what I want to state categorically, what might help is to just go back to 2015 when I was studying ISIS recruiting online.
Yeah.
And I realized the power of the internet and screens. And then later, when we learned about the Cambridge Analytica hack, where personal data was being accrued by bad actors, the Social Dilemma, a documentary that talked about the addictiveness that was deliberately being programmed into social media. And then on top of everything, we had the pandemic, which isolated us even further, made us all super suggestible and susceptible. So there's like a perfect storm of bad things. But I want to explain one very important concept that I learned about in researching the book. It's called fourth generation warfare. Ever hear of it?
No. Tell me.
So it was first described in literature by an American military strategist named William Lind. And it was not psychological warfare to convert the enemy to your way of thinking. It was solely to confuse, disorient, overload, to delegitimize experts, delegitimize science, delegitimize institutions. Why?
Whoa.
Because if you want to brainwash people, you have to disorient them, confuse them, and make them extra vulnerable for that certainty that I know I know more than the generals.
Right, than the experts.
I know more than the economists.
Yes.
Trust me. And to a certain extent, one of my professors in my doctoral dissertation is an expert on developmental psychology. And he's assessed that when I got into the Moonies, I lost 3 levels of development in psychology. I went back to more like a child mentality where everything was all or nothing in a binary, good versus evil, us versus them, and follow the authority figure. They know better, versus being an adult and thinking for yourself and evaluating things using your frontal cortex. That is so valuable. And so what's happening now in Russia is a perfect example of how educated, intelligent people can believe this propaganda, which is 24/7, everyone else around, plus the threat of 15 years in jail if you dare to say anything negative and somebody reports you. So the whole issue of fear, and in most of the cults I've worked with, the fear is what I refer to as a phobia, an irrational fear, versus like being in a totalitarian state or being under the power of a pimp or a trafficker, where they say, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to murder you, or I'm going to murder your parents, or if you try to leave ISIS, we'll shoot you or behead you, right? That takes it to another level of control. But the point is that it's not permanent. And so I did a TEDx talk where I talk about how can I tell if I've been brainwashed. It hasn't been posted yet in terms of this interview, but I basically say, because I analyzed what worked in my deprogramming and what has worked over 45 years, because I've helped thousands of people. And you have to have a time out from the constant reinforcement of the authoritarian cult. Right. Like, turn off your screens, turn off the media, chill. First, then study models of authoritarian mind control. And the standard is Chinese communist brainwashing that American military experts were asked to evaluate in the late 50s, early 60s. What was Mao doing to get people to turn in their own families, to renounce their own education, etc.? And once you understand that, and I offer my model of the BITE model of authoritarian control, once you know that, then you need to honestly reflect, go back in time to when you changed and think, was I lied to? Either outright lies, withholding vital information, or distorting it to make it palatable. Like, really use that model to be honest and self-reflect. And then the last question is, if I knew then what I know now, would I have ever gotten in? Because with QAnon, which is a destructive authoritarian cult, and I have a whole analysis on my freedomofmind.com, they were saying Hillary was going to be arrested, in 2017. Yeah. So if you go back if you got into QAnon in 2017 and what you thought was going to happen compared to now, you're out.
Well, I did this. I did a column recently on, these JFK Jr. truthers that we mentioned.
In Texas,
and he's been, he's supposed to have come back multiple times and has failed to show up. And this doesn't kind of change these true believers' view or loyalty in the QAnon worldview. Yeah. And I likened it. I went back to all of the doomsday predictors and the very well-known doomsday predictors who got it wrong. And yet a lot of the the cult members around these doomsday guys stayed and kept giving money and kept believing. So there is that history. But I think what's so interesting around Trump is he's doing all the things you described, and you described in a better way than I've ever heard. The chaos and the disorientation and the confusion and the undermining of institutions. I think I looked at all of that as just a political play. You know, if he could distrust the media, well, that was about politics, and distrust, you know, the generals, and that was just about his kind of consolidation of power and amassing more power. But if you look at it the way you're describing, it really is conditioning an environment for millions of people to pledge an allegiance despite what their eyes and ears are telling them, right, and feel not like it's a cult because millions of other people are with them, and it's cloaked in this veneer of politics. It's just a political movement. It's just a political response to the libs, to the Dems, when to me it has nothing to do with actual political principles and philosophies, the stuff that you learn about with, you know, Hayek and Rand and de Tocqueville. Right. It has nothing to do with that. It's not really about politics in the way you're describing it, but politics has given it a credibility or a shield in a way
it's a cloak.
To operate as a movement or a business if you're the RNC or, you know.
Exactly.
I mean,
And there are religious cults that are really just about money and power and trafficking, and they use religion as a cloak to hide their behavior. I watched your talks, SE, about Matt Gaetz when he was trying to grill the head 4-star general. Yeah. But what I want to say to you, because, I understood your questions about how could he do that. But if you think about fourth generation warfare, he was following the playbook by attacking the authority figure of the institution, not for the public, but for his base, who are in this black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil mindset. Wild. Right. Yeah. But the thing is once you understand mind control, you demystify it. Now you're in a position to see the techniques. For example, projection. Trump would say, Biden wants to do a coup. No, he was doing the coup, but he wants to distract you, just like a stage magician wants to distract your attention from what he's actually doing.
They're going to rig the election. Meanwhile, he wanted to rig the election.
Exactly.
But, okay, so with all of this, you talked about deprogramming, but before you can deprogram, you have to get you have to go in and get someone out.
Well,
when you talk about something like Nexium, or you talk about, maybe Koresh, you're talking about a very small group of people. What do you do about a large group of people? Again, not every Republican, not every fan of Trump, but you're talking about a large group of people, for example, who believe in QAnon, or who think the insurrection was an act of patriotism, or who think that Trump is right about America and democracy and Biden is the enemy. How do you get a huge group of people to start listening so that you can make them aware of the mind control and the other tactics you've been talking about?
So I've been trained in complex systems thinking from the 80s because of my brother-in-law, who heads the New England Complex System Institute. So instead of thinking linearly of A causes B causes C, if you think microcosm to macrocosm, increasing feedback loops and decreasing feedback loops, the solution needs to be done in multiple places from the top down and the bottom up. So the bottom up for me is doing podcasts like this and encouraging people who are listening, if they ever were in a multi-level marketing group, if they were in a controlling relationship with a narcissist, if they were ever in a company where the boss was a flaming narcissist and exploited them, to try to get them to connect the dots that it's actually happened to them and share their experiences, especially people in NXIVM and Scientology and the more well-known cults. And we're doing a hashtag movement, I got out, to try to capitalize on the success of the Me Too movement. It's like destigmatize that, yep, we bought lies, we got hacked, our minds got hacked, and we got free, and life is
normalize
good
that
out there. So if we can get the millions of people who are ex-cult members educated on how to share their stories and to understand it, that's the bottom-up piece. And I'm proposing, and maybe somebody will be listening to this who has the power to do this, but I think there should be open hearings in Congress on brainwashing, cults, QAnon. Get a panel of the top experts in social psychology, in fourth-generation warfare.
I love it.
And let's educate from the top down. And in my opinion, China is a big threat, the authoritarianism plus the high-tech piece, as well as Putin. We need to think globally about educating the world about how to tell the difference between an ethical involvement where you have rights, basic human rights, and this authoritarian cult mind control.
Well, that's why I think when I said at the outset, I think we're looking at this problem wrong. We're getting it wrong because we're not having those conversations. We're not taking that part seriously enough, either in Congress or in the media. I mean, I try to talk about it when I can. I know this is your life's work. And so we can have this conversation. But these conversations are not happening in a way that I think is worthy of their importance right now, especially when it comes to politics. I want to just get in real quick the Ginny Thomas aspect of this, because I think most people don't know. If you've heard of Ginny Thomas, it's because she's been in the news recently. She's the wife of Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court judge, and some of the text messages that she had sent to Mark Meadows surrounding the insurrection made it very clear she wanted to help that effort to overthrow a Democratic election. People like me who have known of Ginny Thomas in conservative circles for a long time is a bit more familiar with her story. But I think most people don't know that she says she was in a cult at one point in time. And you've written about this. Talk about it.
Well, I long story short, I had even forgotten that in 1986, which was 10 years after my exit from the Moonies, I was an activist almost immediately. Certainly after Jonestown happened, my eyes were open to the enormity of this problem. And, to have parents kill their own children. There were over 300 children who were murdered at Jonestown, including the assassination. So 10 years later, I am running a support group meeting in Kansas City, and Ginny was in the circle. Everybody knew they were being recorded. The mic was being passed around and the cameras were rolling. And she talked about getting out of LifeSpring, which is what we call a large group awareness training. It's been incorrectly described as a self-help group. No, this is go to a hotel ballroom and have your behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions totally controlled to install some new beliefs that there's no such thing as a victim and you need to confront your fears. And no matter what, she described being made to do an exercise where they had to strip down to their underwear or their bikinis, and then body shaming, she described, right? So she got out of that cult and was at this meeting, read Combating Cult Mind Control, which came out 2 years later, but got very active. In fact, she asked me when my book came out to do a congressional briefing, which I actually, I was able to secure an audio recording of that briefing. And we were working to create Cult Awareness Week in honor of slain Congressman Leo Ryan and all the people who died, to just have an opportunity to educate people that destructive mind control cults exist. And so she did that for years. And I remember my last meeting, this was very distinct because she introduced Clarence to me and I shook his hand in 1992. It was the last time I interacted with her. And then I understand she was converted into Catholicism with Clarence the following year by Antonin Scalia's son, Father Paul Scalia. And any counter cult activities stopped. And now fast forward to the text to Mark Meadows about the QAnon-esque beliefs that she was pushing. So my thesis is she got radicalized somewhere along the way. Maybe he did too. Time will tell. But I think this is a window, actually, if the January 6th committee wants to use that as a window to have these public hearings on. So how do you go from being a cult awareness activist in Washington to saying that Biden needs to be arrested and tried in a military tribunal off of Gitmo?
That's so fascinating. And a part of this story that I think needs a bit more attention. Okay, before I let you go, I get your bottom up and top down approaches to what needs to happen here. But I just wonder, going home to confront your dad or your uncle or your friend or your coworker about, things you and I see in front of us. And, it's just so frustrating. And you don't want to seem condescending. Like, how do these people not get it? We're so enlightened and they're not. That's not it at all.
Correct.
So what is the approach? Just interpersonally, not macro level, interpersonally with our friends, our colleagues, our loved ones. What's our approach?
Yep. So a key thing is understanding the dual identity disorder that mind control creates, that that the person you grew up with, that you had a great relationship with, is still in there and is rescuable. That's the first thing, because a lot of people that I've talked to are like, he's gone forever. And I'm like, no, I've actually helped people who've been in cults for 60 years and they're grateful to get out. The thing is they need an exit. And who's going to help them exit but family, friends, or concerned citizens who have a relationship built on respect, kindness, compassion, love. Yeah. I'm thinking now of a friend, Arno Michaelis, who is a white power skinhead, had a band recruiting people into neo-Nazism. And he had a job where his Jewish boss saw he was hungry, he didn't have any food for lunch, and shared a sandwich. It's those kinds of acts of kindness and treating people with respect. The next step is adopting a curious, genuinely curious, interested thing. You're such an interesting, important person. I know you. If it's an aunt or an uncle or a parent, remind them of their past with you. So photos, videos. Remember we went to, the Grand Canyon, or we used to go fishing, or this or that, to bring up that part of the psyche and just say, can you please go back in time and walk me through how you came to believe that Trump was great? What's your earliest memory of Trump? Now, when I've done that with people, they would almost universally say, oh, I saw him on The Apprentice and he was a jerk, or he was an a-hole, or really negative stuff. So, oh, that's really interesting. So you thought he was a jerk. Reflect back. What what were significant that got you to start changing your mind, right? And so that's a critical piece. The bottom line is the most powerful technique, Essie, is asking a good question and being quiet and waiting for a response and then following up. And being genuinely and being open-minded. Hey, change my mind. If let's discuss it. So that's a major piece. I can also say that people in mind control cults are programmed to deflect and minimize any negatives against the leader, the doctrine, or the policy. Right. So the intermediary step is finding a group or a situation that they would agree is a mind control cult. And with Trumpies, Chinese communist brainwashing and traffickers and pimps are the two ways that are most effective to explain the bite model and kind of identify this unfreezing, changing, refreezing of the new identity that's done. So, and people watch The Vow about Nexium, for example, and they're like, holy crap, now I get it, how intelligent, educated people. Why? Because Mark Vicente was a filmmaker in the cult who got permission from the cult leader to film. So you got
film
to have...
all. Right.
Right? So, but the thing is that nobody wants to be conned. Nobody joins an authoritarian cult and says, yeah, I want to be a slave. I want to give over my money, cut off from my family and friends. Yeah. I was asked to throw out all my poetry to demonstrate my commitment to God, and I did. And my work was gone forever. So, but the thing is love. I'm going to sound, squishy and mushy, but love is stronger than mind control, and genuine love and building warm relationships. When people do have doubts and they have disillusioning moments, they need to know they have a safe person to share their doubts with. And with the internet, if they want to, they can Google, what is mind control, cult expert, etc.
Well, this is just, I think, so interesting. And listen, some people might listen to this and feel like I'm like hyperventilating over this, overreacting. I don't know how else to look at what's happened to people I knew in a political movement who have turned everything off. Everything they once knew and believed is gone. And they've given that over.
It appears to be gone, but I'm telling you.
No, I don't mean gone like they're gone. I mean the principles they once believed in, they will now tell you do not matter, or they're actively acting against. But
just remember, it's the cult self, SC.
Of course.
That's the critical thing.
That's why I'm saying this is the only explanation that makes sense to me, because there's no other mechanism by which the people I knew could suddenly, magically, completely believe in other things, think up is down, green is blue, good is bad. And other than these kinds of explanations. So I just think this is super, super interesting. Really appreciate you walking through this with me, Steve. And if you're interested, Steve Hassan's got a huge body of work. And you can listen to his TED Talk, which hasn't come out yet, and all of his books.
I have three that have come out, TEDx Talks.
Other TED Talks. But there's a lot.
I have the Influence Continuum podcast, and I have a course that's 3.5 hours called Understanding Cults, the Basic, and my books. And people can get them in libraries if they're short on funds, or if you really want it and you can't get to a library. I hope more people look into this, because I really think this is a way we can start looking at what's happening at a lot of different parts of our media, political landscape, everything that's kind of happening. We need to be thinking about these things. So Steve Hassan, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. This was a super fun, almost hour to sit in for Pete. Thanks for letting me take the seat. It'll be fun to talk again next time. Essie, if I may, and I know we're wrapped up, but I would just like to state categorically, Vladimir Putin was raised in an authoritarian cult, the Soviet Union. He was in the KGB, and that's his mindset. And so if world politicians are trying to understand how to interact with him, it's critical to use that frame too, because it's really about him preserving his own power, and he doesn't care how many Russians suffer or how many Ukrainians suffer. And he is a demagogue, and with nuclear capabilities, that worries us. So
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much
again,
for
Steve.
having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Pete, I guess you can have your show back.
All right. Thank you guys very much. SE Cupp, what a wonderful pleasure and honor to have you sitting in for me. And I love that conversation. I learned so much more than I have from the several times I've interviewed Stephen Hassan myself. Such a great look. Thank you very much, both of you, for doing it. And go check out everything that both these guys have to offer each and every day. SE Cupp, Stephen Hassan. Look in the show links for today's show and every day's show to find out more about my guest, me, and ways to support it. All right, John Carroll, he sings us in, he sings us out. We're very lucky to have him. Thank you very much for listening today, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think your driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. Let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of the stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand